The first time my mother hit me with my own phone, I was 23 years old and bleeding onto my best friend's couch. The second time she tried, I had her arrested. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Picture this. It's 3 in the morning and I'm in an emergency room that smells like disinfectant and desperation. A doctor with tired eyes is sewing 6 stitches into my temple, her needle pulling thread through skin while she asks me the same question for the third time. Are you safe at home? Blood has dried in my hair, turned it stiff and matted against my skull. Across the room, Maya is sobbing quietly while she fills out forms that have phrases like domestic violence and assault with a weapon stamped across the top in letters so bold they might as well be screaming. And me? I'm sitting there under fluorescent lights so bright they make my concussion worse. One hand pressed against the gauze on my head, my mind stuck on a loop playing the same thought over and over like a broken record. My mother did this. My own mother smashed my phone against a table, picked up the broken pieces, and deliberately struck me in the head hard enough to split skin and shatter bone. While my father stood 3 feet away, filming the whole thing on his phone like he was documenting a science experiment. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that it took me 23 years to realize this wasn't normal. That mothers aren't supposed to destroy you. That love isn't supposed to feel like drowning. The emergency room doctor told me I was lucky. 6 stitches, a concussion, and a destroyed phone were apparently lucky compared to what could have happened. But sitting there at 3 in the morning, watching the person who loved me most in the world cry over what my own mother had done to me, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had just woken up from a nightmare I didn't know I was living. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt trapped by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button. Subscribe because this story gets so much worse before it gets better, and drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to choose between family and your own sanity. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends, but here's what you need to understand. Abuse doesn't announce itself with violence. It doesn't start with blood and broken bones and emergency room visits. It starts with a comment about your weight, a joke at your expense, a door locked from the outside for your own good. It starts so quietly you don't even hear it coming until you're already drowning in it. So let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I thought this was just how families worked. I grew up in what looked like a picture-perfect house on Maple Avenue in a suburb 40 minutes outside the city. My father Richard worked in IT management for a pharmaceutical company, pulling in 6 figures. My mother Eleanor was a part-time bookkeeper for a local church, though she spent most of her time volunteering on committees and organizing neighborhood events. I was their only child, born after 3 miscarriages that Eleanor reminded me of constantly, as if I owed her my entire existence for simply being born alive. From the outside, we were the family everyone envied. 2-story colonial, with a manicured lawn, a golden retriever named Biscuit, family photos in matching outfits every Christmas. Eleanor hosted book clubs and dinner parties. Richard coached Little League even though I was a girl and never played. They smiled at neighbors, donated to charity auctions, attended every PTA meeting. Behind closed doors was a different story entirely. Eleanor had rules for everything. How I sat at the dinner table, knees together, elbows off the surface. How I spoke, never interrupting, never raising my voice, always saying please and thank you even when asking for basic necessities. How I dressed, nothing too tight or too loose, nothing that would make people think she didn't take care of me properly. How I spent my time, every minute accounted for with activities she approved of, friends she had vetted, hobbies she deemed worthwhile. I learned early that disagreeing with Eleanor was dangerous. Not the kind of dangerous that left bruises, not yet, but the kind that made the whole house feel like a bomb waiting to detonate. She perfected the art of the silent treatment, weaponizing her absence until you felt like you had committed murder just for having your own opinion. Days would pass without her speaking to me. She would drift past like I was a ghost, sighing dramatically every time I dared to exist in the same room. It was psychological warfare disguised as disappointment, and it worked. My father Richard never intervened. He had this philosophy that marriage meant supporting your spouse no matter what, even when that spouse was emotionally torturing your child. He would tell me that Eleanor had a difficult childhood, that she loved me in her own way, that I needed to be more understanding, more patient, more grateful. Richard had his own sickness. Starting when I was 12, he began filming everything. Every argument, every dinner, every moment of my life ended up documented on his phone. He called it making memories. I called it what it was: surveillance. At first it seemed harmless. Video of me at my 8th grade graduation, me blowing out birthday candles, me opening Christmas presents, normal family stuff. But then it became weirder. He would film arguments between me and Eleanor, would zoom in on my face when I was crying, would narrate what was happening like he was doing a documentary voiceover. When I was 16 and tried to confront him about it, asked him why he always had to film everything, he told me he was protecting himself, creating evidence in case I ever tried to accuse them of anything, in case I ever tried to make them look bad. That should have been my first real warning sign. But when you grow up in dysfunction, dysfunction becomes your normal. You don't recognize red flags because red is the only color you've ever known. I made it through high school by becoming invisible. I got good grades because bad grades meant lectures and restrictions and disappointed silence. I joined the photography club because it was the one place Eleanor couldn't follow me. The one activity where I could point a camera at something other than myself and feel like I had some kind of control. I took pictures of abandoned buildings and graffitied walls and the overpass where trains rumbled past every evening, things that were broken but still standing, things that survived despite everything working against them. My photography teacher, Mr. Harrison, was the first adult who ever told me I was talented. Not just good, not just adequate, but genuinely talented. He entered one of my photos in a regional competition without telling me. It was a black and white shot of a cracked window with light streaming through, taken in an old factory on the edge of town. It won second place. I was thrilled. Mr. Harrison was proud. Eleanor was furious. She said entering competitions without her permission was disrespectful. She said the photo made our town look poor and run down. She said I was embarrassing the family by drawing attention to ugly things instead of beautiful ones. She made me withdraw from the photography club. She took my camera, a Canon Rebel I had saved up for by working at a grocery store, and locked it in her bedroom closet. I got it back 6 months later, after I apologized, after I wrote her a letter explaining how sorry I was for being selfish and thoughtless, after I promised to only take photos she approved of. By then, the regional competition had a gallery showing of winning entries that I wasn't allowed to attend. That was the year I started planning my escape. I applied to colleges in secret, using the school counselor's office as my mailing address. I applied for scholarships and grants and work-study programs. I wrote essays about overcoming adversity without explicitly stating what that adversity was. I got accepted to a decent state school 3 hours away with enough financial aid to cover most of tuition. When I told Eleanor, she cried. Not tears of pride or excitement, but tears of betrayal. How could I abandon her after everything she had sacrificed for me? How could I be so selfish, so ungrateful? Didn't I know how much it would hurt her to have me gone? She refused to sign the FAFSA paperwork. Without her signature, without her tax returns, I couldn't get federal student aid. I tried to explain that I could file as an independent, but that required proof of extenuating circumstances that I didn't have. No police reports of abuse. No court documents removing me from the home. Just a very controlling mother who knew exactly how to keep me trapped. I ended up going to community college locally, living at home, commuting to classes in Eleanor's old Honda Civic that she reminded me daily was a privilege she could revoke at any time. I studied graphic design because Eleanor said photography wasn't a real major. I worked part-time at a coffee shop called Grounds for Thought, saving every dollar I could in a bank account Eleanor didn't know about. That's where I met Liam. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday after his shift at the children's hospital where he worked as a pediatric nurse. Always ordered the same thing, black coffee with 2 sugars, and always left a $5 tip even though his order was only $3. After the 3rd week, he started staying longer, sitting at the counter, and talking to me during slow periods. Liam was safe. That's the best way I can describe him. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't try to fix me. He just treated me like a person whose company he enjoyed, and that was so foreign to me that I didn't know how to handle it at first. We became friends slowly, carefully. He told me about his patients, about the 4-year-old who called him Nurse Lion because she couldn't pronounce Liam, about the teenager with leukemia who wanted to be a marine biologist. I told him about my classes, about the design projects I was working on, about the photos I still took secretly on my phone when Eleanor wasn't monitoring my every move. He never met my mother during those first months. I made sure of that. I told him I lived at home but kept my family life deliberately vague. He respected the boundary without making me feel weird about it. Maya I had known since 7th grade. She was the kind of friend who saw through bullshit, who called you out when you were lying to yourself, who showed up even when you pushed her away. We had drifted apart during high school when Eleanor started limiting my social life, but when I started community college, Maya was there too, studying nursing. We reconnected over shared trauma, over both having families that were complicated in different ways. Maya's parents had divorced when she was 14, a messy split that involved affairs and custody battles, and her mother moving to Arizona with a man Maya had met exactly twice. Her father worked constantly, trying to make up for being a single parent, leaving Maya to essentially raise herself. She understood what it meant to have a family that looked nothing like the sitcom version. She understood what it meant to feel like you were always performing, always trying to be enough, always failing. By the time I was 21, I had saved enough money to move out. Not much, maybe $4,000, but enough for first month's rent, security deposit, and some basic furniture from thrift stores and Facebook Marketplace. I found a studio apartment in a converted warehouse downtown, 500 square feet with exposed brick and windows that rattled when trucks drove by. The rent was $800 a month, which was pushing my budget even with my coffee shop wages, but it was mine. Or so I thought. When I told Eleanor I was moving out, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She got very quiet, very still, and then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made my stomach hurt. She said that was wonderful news. She said she was so proud of me for taking this step toward independence. She said she wanted to help, wanted to make sure I got started on the right foot. She offered to co-sign the lease, said it would make the application process easier, said it would give me a better chance of being approved. I should have said no. I should have walked away, found a different apartment, waited longer to save more money. But I was exhausted from fighting her, exhausted from always being on guard, and I wanted so badly to believe that maybe she had changed. That maybe she could be a normal mother who supported her daughter's independence. I signed the lease with her name next to mine. She kept a copy of the keys. The first month was beautiful. I arranged my tiny space exactly how I wanted it. I bought plants and hung string lights and put up photographs on every available wall surface. I could eat cereal for dinner, could stay up until 3 in the morning, could exist without someone monitoring my every movement. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 21 years and could finally exhale. Maya and Liam came over constantly. We would order pizza and play video games and watch terrible reality TV. Maya started dating a woman named Sam who worked at the hospital with Liam, and the four of us became this little chosen family unit that felt more real than my biological family ever had. I started taking photographs again, really taking them, not just sneaking shots on my phone. I saved up for 3 months and bought a used Nikon D3500 from a photographer who was upgrading his equipment. I spent my days off wandering the city, capturing moments. A homeless man feeding pigeons in the park, teenagers skateboarding under an overpass, an elderly woman sitting alone in a diner at 2 in the morning. I posted them on Instagram under the handle Fractured Light, never showing my face, never using my real name. It started small, maybe 50 followers, mostly people I knew. But then a local blogger shared one of my photos, a shot of a boarded-up church with light streaming through broken stained glass windows. The caption was about finding beauty in decay, about how broken things can still be sacred. It went viral. Not internet-famous viral, but viral enough that my follower count jumped to 5,000 in a week. People started commissioning me for portraits, for event photography. For commercial work, I had no idea how to price. I was making money doing something I loved, and it felt like maybe everything was finally coming together. That's when Eleanor started showing up. At first, it was supposedly helpful visits. She would text that she was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off some groceries. She would show up with cleaning supplies, saying she noticed the bathroom could use some attention. She would bring me leftovers from dinner, enough food for one person, packaged in containers I had to return. Every visit came with commentary. The apartment was too messy. I wasn't eating properly. My plants were dying. Had I been going to church? Was I remembering to call Aunt Susan on her birthday? Did I realize that the light bill seemed high? Was I leaving lights on unnecessarily? I would thank her, promise to do better, and wait for her to leave. Then I would check if anything was missing, because things were disappearing. Small things at first. A necklace my grandmother had given me, a book I was in the middle of reading, $20 I had left on my dresser for parking meters. When I asked Eleanor about it, she acted horrified that I would accuse her of stealing. She said I was clearly disorganized, clearly losing things on my own, clearly not ready for independent living if I couldn't keep track of my possessions. I started locking things away. I bought a safe for important documents and jewelry. I kept my camera with me at all times. I changed my behavior, made my space less personal, more sterile, because I knew she was coming through it when I wasn't home. The first time I asked for my key back, Eleanor cried. She said she only kept it for emergencies. What if there was a fire? What if I had a medical emergency and she needed to get in? What if? She made me feel like asking for basic privacy was the same as telling her I didn't love her. The second time I asked, she got angry. She reminded me that her name was on the lease. That legally, she had every right to access the apartment. That if I had a problem with that, maybe I should have thought about it before asking her to co-sign. The third time I asked, she didn't respond at all. She just kept showing up, kept rearranging my things, kept making herself at home in my space. I was working at the coffee shop 40 hours a week by then, picking up photography gigs on weekends. I was exhausted, running on caffeine and ambition, and the desperate hope that if I just worked hard enough, made enough money, I could break the lease early and start over somewhere she couldn't find me. Then the text messages started. Eleanor had always been good at subtle manipulation, at making you feel guilty without explicitly saying anything wrong, but the texts were different. They were desperate, needy, accusatory. Haven't heard from you in 3 days. Hope you're not too busy for your mother. Drove by your apartment last night. Noticed you had visitors. Hope you're not getting into trouble. Your father and I have been discussing your behavior. We're very concerned. The money we've invested in you over the years, the sacrifices we've made, and this is how you repay us. I stopped responding, which only made it worse. The texts became more frequent, more aggressive. She started calling my workplace. She started showing up at the coffee shop, ordering nothing, just sitting in the corner watching me work. When I asked her to leave, she said it was a public establishment and she had every right to be there. My manager, a woman named Patricia, who had known me for 2 years and knew something was wrong even if I wouldn't talk about it, started scheduling me for shifts when Eleanor was supposedly at work. It helped, but it didn't solve the problem. Maya finally confronted me about it 6 months after I had moved out. We were at her apartment, which she shared with Sam in a much nicer part of town. Sam was working a night shift, and Maya had made dinner, actual dinner with vegetables and protein and carbs that weren't pizza. She waited until I had finished eating, then put down her fork and looked at me with that expression that meant she wasn't going to let me deflect. "Your mom is stalking you," she said. Not a question, a statement. I tried to laugh it off, tried to say it wasn't that serious, tried to change the subject. Maya didn't let me. "Chloe, I've watched her sit outside your apartment in her car for hours. Sam saw her going through your mailbox last week. Liam told me she's been asking him about your work schedule. This isn't normal concerned parent behavior. This is controlling, obsessive behavior." I knew she was right. Of course, I knew she was right. But admitting it meant admitting I had made a mistake, meant admitting I was still trapped, meant admitting that moving out hadn't actually freed me at all. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, and my voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Her name is on my lease. She has legal access to my apartment. If I try to get a restraining order, I have to prove she's dangerous, and she's not. She's just suffocating me." Maya reached across the table and took my hand. "Then we find a way to break the lease. We find you a new place. We make sure she doesn't have access to any part of your life." It sounded so simple when she said it. It wasn't simple at all. Breaking a lease meant penalties, meant losing my security deposit, meant potential damage to my credit score. Finding a new apartment without a cosigner meant proving I could afford it on my own, meant making 3 times the rent in monthly income, which I barely did. It meant starting over, again, and I was so tired of starting over. I told Maya I would think about it. I meant it. But thinking about it and actually doing it were different things. 2 more months passed. Eleanor escalated. She started leaving notes in my apartment, little sticky notes on my mirror, on my computer, in my refrigerator. "Remember to call Aunt Susan. Your bathroom is mildewing. These eggs are expired." Proof that she had been there, proof that she could come and go as she pleased, proof that I had no actual privacy. She started posting things online, too. Facebook updates about how hard it was to have an ungrateful daughter. Vague Instagram stories about children who abandoned their parents, comments on my Fractured Light account asking if I had time to talk to strangers online but not to my own mother. My follower count was up to 15,000 by then. I had done a few small gallery showings at coffee shops and community centers. Nothing major, but enough that I was starting to build a portfolio, starting to think maybe photography could be more than a side hustle. Eleanor hated it. She would leave comments on my posts under fake accounts, saying the photos were derivative, saying I was glorifying poverty, saying real artists didn't need validation from strangers on the internet. I would block the accounts and new ones would appear. Richard was still filming everything, but now he was filming Eleanor's visits to my apartment. He would send me videos with no context, just footage of Eleanor straightening my bookshelf or checking my fridge or standing in my space looking at my photos on the walls. The message was clear. We're watching. We're always watching. I developed insomnia. I would lie awake at night listening for the sound of a key in my lock, for footsteps in the hallway, for any indication that she was coming. I started sleeping with my phone next to my pillow, camera ready, evidence ready, even though I knew documentation wouldn't stop her. Maya offered multiple times to let me stay with her and Sam. I always said no. I didn't want to bring my dysfunction into their space, didn't want Eleanor to start showing up at their apartment too, didn't want to be the friend who needed constant rescuing. Liam suggested I talk to a lawyer. I looked into it, made some calls, found out that family law was complicated and expensive, and that proving emotional abuse was nearly impossible without concrete evidence of physical harm or explicit threats. So I did nothing. I endured. I survived. I told myself it couldn't get worse. I was wrong. The incident that changed everything happened on a Thursday in July. The heat that summer was brutal, the kind that made the pavement shimmer and turned the city into a convection oven. My air conditioning unit was broken, had been broken for 2 weeks, and my landlord kept promising to fix it but never showing up. Maya had been asking to come over for weeks. She wanted to see some new photos I had printed, wanted to hang out somewhere that wasn't her apartment or a coffee shop or a bar. I kept making excuses. Too messy, too hot, too tired. But that Thursday she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Chloe, I'm coming over tonight and we're going to sit in front of a fan and eat ice cream and play Mario Kart, and you're not allowed to say no," she said over the phone during my lunch break. "Liam's coming too. He's bringing pizza. We're having a normal friend hangout like normal people in their 20s. Something about the way she said it, the insistence, the refusal to let me isolate myself anymore, broke through my defenses. "Okay," I said. "Okay, come over." I spent the rest of my shift anxious, checking my phone constantly, hoping Eleanor wouldn't choose that night to make one of her unannounced visits. I texted her after work, a preemptive strike. "Having friends over tonight. Please don't stop by." She read it immediately. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then finally, a response. "Your apartment? I think you mean our apartment. But fine, I'll leave you to your little party." The message made my stomach clench, but I chose to interpret it as permission. Chose to believe that maybe she would actually respect this boundary. Maya and Liam arrived at 7. Maya carrying a grocery bag full of ice cream, and Liam balancing 3 pizza boxes like a professional waiter. They were laughing about something, some story from the hospital, and their easy joy was infectious. I felt the anxiety in my chest start to loosen. We ate pizza sitting on my floor because I only had 2 chairs. We played Mario Kart on the ancient Nintendo Switch I had bought used. We talked about nothing important and everything important, the kind of conversation that meanders from childhood memories to philosophical questions to stupid jokes without any clear transition. For 2 hours, I forgot about Eleanor. I forgot about the texts and the visits and the constant surveillance. I forgot about being afraid in my own space. And then I heard the key in the lock. I knew that sound. Had heard it dozens of times, always when I wasn't expecting it. Always as a reminder that this space wasn't really mine. But hearing it with Maya and Liam there, seeing their confused expressions as the door opened without a knock, without permission, without warning, made me see how abnormal it really was. Eleanor stood in the doorway, and for a moment she looked genuinely surprised to see other people there. But the surprise faded quickly, replaced by something colder. Richard was behind her, phone already out, already recording. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice sharp and bright like broken glass, "isn't this cozy?" Maya stood up first, always the protector. "Mrs. Morgan, Chloe said she was having friends over tonight. Did you need something?" Eleanor's eyes swept over Maya with barely concealed disdain, then landed on Liam, who was still sitting on the floor with a pizza crust in his hand, looking thoroughly bewildered. "I don't need permission to enter my own property," Eleanor said. She walked fully into the apartment, Richard following, still filming. "I came to check on things. The landlord called about a noise complaint." It was a lie. An obvious lie. We had been playing video games at a reasonable volume in a building full of young people who played music at all hours. But Maya didn't challenge it. She just moved closer to me, a physical barrier between me and my mother. Eleanor's attention fixed on the pizza boxes, the empty ice cream containers, the general evidence of people enjoying themselves. "Making quite a mess, I see. You know how hard it is to get grease stains out of carpet?" "We'll clean up," I said quietly. "We were just about to." "Were you?" Eleanor moved toward the coffee table where my phone was lying face up. She picked it up, looked at the screen, the lock screen photo I had set as one of my recent photographs. A street musician playing guitar at sunset, the light turning everything golden. "Still wasting time with this nonsense," she said. "Still pretending you're an artist instead of getting a real job." "She has a real job," Liam said, and his voice was steady but firm. "She works 40 hours a week at the coffee shop." "Oh, you must be the nurse," Eleanor said, turning to look at him fully. "Chloe mentioned you. How sweet that you take an interest in her little hobbies." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. I saw Liam's jaw tighten, saw Maya's hands curl into fists. "Actually," Maya said, "Chloe's photography is really taking off. She had a showing last month that sold out. She's building a real career." Eleanor laughed, sharp and brittle. "A career? Is that what we're calling it? A few pictures posted online for strangers to give you little heart emojis. That's not a career, sweetie. That's a cry for attention." She turned back to me, still holding my phone. "Do you know how much money your father and I have spent on you over the years? The private schools, the music lessons you quit, the college tuition we wasted when you dropped out. And this is what you do with our investment. You take pictures of trash and hang out with people who encourage your delusions." "I didn't drop out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm still taking classes." "Community college," Eleanor spat. "After we gave you the opportunity for a real education, after we sacrificed so you could have chances we never had." "You refused to sign the financial aid paperwork," Maya said, and there was anger in her voice now. "You trapped her here." Eleanor's eyes snapped to Maya, cold and furious. "I beg your pardon. This is a family matter. It's none of your business." "It became my business when you started abusing your daughter." The word hung in the air. Abuse. I had never said it out loud, had never let anyone else say it where Eleanor could hear. It felt like detonating a bomb in my tiny apartment. Eleanor went very still. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Abuse. You think making sure my daughter has a roof over her head is abuse. You think caring about her future is abuse. You think trying to protect her from making terrible decisions is abuse. I think controlling every aspect of her life is abuse," Maya shot back. "I think showing up uninvited constantly is abuse. I think stealing her things and going through her belongings is abuse." "Stealing," Eleanor repeated, and now her voice was rising. "Stealing? I have never stolen anything in my life. How dare you come into this apartment that I pay for, and accuse me of being a thief?" "You don't pay for it," I said, and I was shaking now, my whole body trembling with something that might have been fear or might have been rage. "I pay for it. I pay rent every month. I have bank statements proving it." Eleanor turned to me, and the look on her face was something I had seen before but never this intense. Pure hatred, mixed with disbelief that I had dared to contradict her in front of witnesses. "You pay $800 a month," she said slowly. "Do you know how much this apartment actually costs?" $1,300. I've been covering the difference because you couldn't afford it on your pathetic coffee shop salary. So yes, Chloe, I do pay for it. I pay for you to have a place to live while you play photographer and waste your life." The number hit me like a physical blow. 1,300. The landlord had told me 800, had shown me a lease that said 800. But Eleanor's name was on that lease too, and suddenly I understood. She had negotiated a higher rent with the landlord, had structured it so she was paying more, so I would be indebted to her, so she would have ammunition for exactly this kind of moment. "That's not my fault," I said, and my voice cracked. "You never told me it was more. You let me believe I was covering my own rent." "Because you should have been grateful enough to ask," Eleanor snapped. "Because a normal daughter would have thanked her mother for the help instead of sneaking around behind my back, instead of telling her friends lies about me, instead of treating me like I'm some kind of monster." "You are a monster," Maya said flatly. That's when things escalated beyond anything I could have predicted. Eleanor's face twisted into something ugly, something feral. She looked at my phone still in her hand, looked at me, looked at Maya, and something in her snapped. "This," she said, holding up my phone, "this is what you use to spread lies about me. This is what you use to get attention from strangers, instead of appreciating your own family. This is what you use to text your little friends and plan your little rebellion." She raised the phone above her head, and I knew what was coming but couldn't move fast enough to stop it. She brought it down hard against the corner of the coffee table, the sound of shattering glass and plastic loud in the small space. The screen spiderwebbed, pieces breaking off and scattering across the floor. "Mom!" I gasped. moving toward her, toward my phone, toward the documentation of my entire life that was now in pieces. She wasn't done. She picked up the destroyed phone, the screen hanging loose from the body, glass edges sharp enough to cut, and she looked at me with something that transcended anger. "You want to know what I think of your photography career," she said. "You want to know what I think of your independence and your boundaries and your disrespect." And then she swung the phone at my head. I saw it coming. I tried to move, but the apartment was small and cluttered, and I was wedged between the couch and the coffee table with nowhere to go. The edge of the phone, the broken glass and sharp plastic, connected with my temple. The pain was immediate and shocking, white-hot and disorienting. I felt something warm running down the side of my face, felt my legs go weak. I grabbed for the back of the couch, trying to stay upright, trying to process what had just happened. Maya was screaming. Liam was moving toward me, his nurse training kicking in. Richard was still filming, the phone steady in his hands, documenting his wife assaulting his daughter like it was a nature documentary about predators and prey. "You needed to learn," Eleanor was saying, her voice eerily calm considering what she had just done. "You needed to understand that actions have consequences, that disrespect has consequences, that you can't just do whatever you want without considering how it affects your family." "You just assaulted her," Liam said, his voice shaking with fury. He was pressing something against my head, his hand gentle despite his anger. "You just used a weapon to strike your daughter in the head in front of witnesses. That's a felony." "It's discipline," Richard said, still filming. "She's been out of control for months. Someone needed to teach her accountability." "Accountability?" Maya repeated, incredulous. "You're both insane. Chloe, we're leaving. We're leaving right now, and we're going to the hospital, and then we're calling the police." I couldn't speak. The pain in my head was overwhelming, pulsing with my heartbeat. I could feel blood soaking into Liam's makeshift compress, could taste copper in my mouth where I had bitten my tongue. Eleanor stepped back, seemed to realize for the first time that maybe she had gone too far, but she didn't apologize. She didn't try to help. She just looked at me with something that might have been disappointment or might have been disgust. "This is your fault," she said. "If you had just been grateful, if you had just respected me, none of this would have happened. But you had to push, you had to rebel, you had to make me the villain." "You are the villain," I managed to say through the pain. "You just proved it." Maya and Liam got me out of there, Maya supporting one side and Liam the other, guiding me down the stairs and into Maya's car. I looked back once as we were pulling away, saw Eleanor and Richard standing in my doorway, still watching, Richard still holding his phone. The emergency room was busy, full of people with various injuries and illnesses waiting for attention. The triage nurse took one look at the blood on my face and bumped me up in priority. Within 20 minutes, I was in an exam room, a different doctor carefully cleaning the wound, examining my pupils, asking me questions about the date and the president and how many fingers she was holding up. "You have a concussion," she said gently, "and you're going to need stitches for this laceration. Can you tell me how this happened?" I looked at Maya, at Liam, at these two people who had witnessed everything and who were looking at me with expressions that were equal parts concern and rage and determination. "My mother hit me," I said out loud for the first time. "With my phone. After she broke it. She hit me with the broken glass and plastic edges." The doctor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. She had heard this story before, maybe not exactly like this, but close enough. "I'm going to have the social worker come talk to you," she said, "and I'm required by law to file a report with the police about this injury. Is that okay with you?" I nodded, then immediately regretted it as pain spiked through my skull. "Yes, that's okay." The next several hours were a blur of procedures and paperwork and conversations with people who all seemed to be asking the same questions in slightly different ways. The social worker was kind but direct, asking about patterns of behavior, about previous incidents, about whether I felt safe going home. A police officer came to take my statement, writing everything down in a small notepad, asking for Eleanor's and Richard's full names, their address, their contact information. Maya had called her father during the wait, and he called Detective Miller, someone he had worked with years ago on a community safety initiative. Detective Miller showed up at the hospital around 2 a.m, a tall black man with gray at his temples and the kind of eyes that had seen everything twice. He pulled up a chair next to my hospital bed, where I was waiting for discharge papers, 6 fresh stitches in my temple hidden under a bandage. Maya and Liam had gone to get coffee, giving us privacy. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and steady, I'm Detective Aaron Miller. Maya's father is a good friend of mine, and when he told me what happened tonight, I wanted to come see you myself. I nodded carefully, aware of the pain medication making everything feel slightly distant and floaty. I've already spoken with the responding officer and reviewed the initial report. He continued, what your mother did tonight is assault and battery. The fact that she used a weapon, even if that weapon was your phone, makes it aggravated assault. The fact that your father filmed it and did nothing to stop it makes him an accomplice. He paused, making sure I was following. But I want to be honest with you about something. Cases like this, family cases, they're complicated. Your mother is going to say it was an accident. She's going to say you provoked her. She's going to say she was trying to take the phone away from you, and it slipped. And without video evidence showing otherwise, it becomes your word against hers. Richard filmed it, I said. He filmed the whole thing. Detective Miller's expression shifted, something like grim satisfaction crossing his face. Did he now? Do you know where that footage might be? On his phone, probably. He films everything. He's been filming me for years, filming arguments, filming my mother yelling at me. He says it's for evidence, for protection, in case I ever try to accuse them of anything. In case you try to accuse them, Detective Miller repeated slowly. So he's been documenting abuse to use against you if you ever report the abuse. When he said it like that, it sounded even more insane than it felt. We're going to need that phone, he said. We're going to need to get a warrant for that device and any cloud storage he might have. Because if he recorded what happened tonight, if we can see clear evidence of your mother assaulting you while he stood by and filmed it, that changes everything. Hope and fear warred in my chest. Hope that maybe there would be proof, that maybe I wouldn't be dismissed as a difficult daughter making accusations. Fear of what would happen when Eleanor found out I had gone to the police, when she realized I wasn't going to just forgive and forget this time. I'm scared, I admitted. She's going to be so angry. She doesn't get to be angry, Detective Miller said firmly. She doesn't get to assault you and then be upset that there are consequences. And if she tries to retaliate, if she tries to contact you or threaten you or intimidate you in any way, that's additional charges. He stood up, pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to me. I'm going to file for that warrant first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, I need you to stay somewhere safe. Not your apartment, somewhere your mother doesn't have access to. I can stay with Maya, I said. Good. And Chloe. He waited until I met his eyes. I know this is hard. I know she's your mother and you probably have complicated feelings about all of this. But what happened tonight wasn't discipline. It wasn't a parenting choice. It was a crime. And my job is to make sure people who commit crimes are held accountable, regardless of their relationship to the victim. I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes for the first time since the assault. Throughout the chaos of the emergency room, throughout the questions and the stitches and the paperwork, I had been numb. But Detective Miller's matter-of-fact validation, his refusal to minimize what had happened, broke something open in me. Thank you, I whispered. He squeezed my shoulder gently, the kind of paternal gesture my own father had never offered, and left to talk to the other officers. Maya and Liam returned with coffee and cookies from the hospital cafeteria. We sat in silence for a while, me picking at a chocolate chip cookie I didn't really want, them pretending to read magazines that were 6 months out of date. I'm sorry, I finally said. They both looked at me like I had said something offensive. Sorry for what? Maya demanded. For dragging you into this. For making you witness that. For being such a mess that you had to spend your Thursday night in a hospital emergency room. Liam shook his head firmly. Chloe, you didn't drag us into anything. We chose to be there. We chose to be your friends. And we're choosing to help you through this. What Liam said, Maya added. Plus, I'm furious, and I need someone to be furious at, and it's definitely not you. Your mother is abusive, and your father is complicit, and I'm so glad we were there tonight because otherwise she might have gotten away with it again. Again, I repeated. It wasn't this bad before. She never physically hurt me before. That you remember? Maya said gently. But Chloe, abuse escalates. It starts with control and manipulation, and it builds to violence. Tonight wasn't random. Tonight was the culmination of 23 years of her treating you like property instead of a person. I knew she was right. Deep down, I had always known. But hearing it said out loud, in the fluorescent lights of a hospital room at 3 a.m, made it real in a way it had never been real before. The doctor came back with discharge papers and instructions. Watch for signs of worsening concussion. Take it easy for at least a week. Follow up with my primary care doctor. Come back immediately if I experience severe headaches, vomiting, confusion, or loss of consciousness. Maya drove me to her apartment. Sam was waiting up despite the late hour, and she hugged me carefully, mindful of my injury. "You're staying here as long as you need," she said. "No question, no discussion. Just a statement of fact." They set me up in their guest room, which was really more of a storage space with a futon, but it felt safer than anywhere I had been in months. Maya brought me extra pillows and water and her phone charger since mine was presumably still in pieces on my apartment floor. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's face in that moment before she swung the phone. Not angry, not out of control, cold and deliberate. Like she had calculated exactly how much force to use, exactly where to hit me, exactly what it would take to remind me who was in charge. The next morning, Friday, Maya called in sick to her classes and insisted I not even think about going to work. Liam showed up before his shift with bagels and the kind of gentle concern that made me want to cry. "I went by your apartment this morning," he said carefully, "with a police escort. I got your camera, your laptop, some clothes, your documents. Everything important. It's all in my car." The relief was overwhelming. I had been afraid to ask, afraid that going back would trigger another confrontation, but Liam had thought of it without me saying anything. "Thank you," I said, and it felt inadequate for what he had done, for what they had both done. "The apartment looked untouched," Liam continued. "Eleanor and Richard weren't there. But the phone was still on the floor, still broken, still covered in blood. Blood, my blood, physical evidence of what she had done. Did the police take it?" I asked. "They photographed it, collected it as evidence. They also took samples from the carpet, from the coffee table. They were very thorough." That should have made me feel better. It mostly just made me feel tired. Detective Miller called late Friday afternoon. He had the warrant for Richard's phone and was executing it that evening. Richard had initially refused to hand over the device, claiming attorney-client privilege even though he wasn't an attorney and had no client. The warrant overruled his objections. "We'll review the footage this weekend," Detective Miller said. "I'll contact you Monday with an update. In the meantime, I've filed for a temporary restraining order on your behalf. Your mother and father are not allowed to contact you, to come near you, or to access your apartment. Violation of that order is an arrestable offense." A restraining order. Against my own parents. The reality of what was happening, what I had set in motion by telling the truth, hit me all at once. "Are you okay?" Detective Miller asked, responding to my silence. "I don't know," I admitted. "This is really happening, isn't it? This is really real. It's really real," he confirmed. "And I know it's scary. But Chloe, what happened to you was not okay, and you deserve better than to live in fear of the people who are supposed to protect you." I spent the weekend in a fog of pain medication and anxiety. My head throbbed constantly, a dull ache punctuated by sharp stabs whenever I moved too quickly. Maya kept me company, kept me distracted with movies and card games and stories from her nursing classes. Sam cooked meals I barely tasted but forced myself to eat because they were worried about me. Liam brought over my camera and laptop Sunday afternoon, and I spent an hour going through my photos, making sure nothing was missing or corrupted. Everything was intact. My entire portfolio, years of work, backed up on external drives and cloud storage, because I had learned long ago not to trust Eleanor, not to destroy things I cared about. I found myself looking at one photo in particular, one I had taken 6 months earlier. It was a self-portrait of sorts, taken in a mirror in an abandoned warehouse, my face partially obscured by shadow, my eyes the only clear element. I had titled it Witness when I posted it, thinking about how I was bearing witness to the city's decay and renewal. But looking at it now, I realized I had been witnessing my own decay too, had been documenting my own slow destruction without fully recognizing it. Monday morning, Detective Miller called. His voice was carefully controlled, professional, but I could hear something underneath. Anger, maybe. Or disgust. "Chloe, we've reviewed the footage from Richard's phone. All of it. Not just from Thursday night, but from the past 2 years. He had everything backed up to a cloud server. Everything." My stomach dropped. "Everything?" "Everything. Hours and hours of footage of your mother berating you, belittling you, going through your things. Footage of her taking items from your apartment. Footage of arguments where she's clearly the aggressor and you're trying to de-escalate, and yes, footage from Thursday night that shows exactly what happened. He paused, and I heard him take a breath. The Thursday footage is clear and damning. It shows your mother destroying your phone without provocation. It shows her picking up the broken phone and deliberately striking you in the head with it while you were trapped against furniture with nowhere to go. It shows you bleeding and trying to protect yourself while she continues to berate you. And it shows Richard filming all of it without intervening, even making comments encouraging the violence. I felt sick. I had known Richard was filming, had lived with his constant documentation for years, but hearing it described in law enforcement terms made it somehow worse. What happens now? I asked. Now we move forward with charges. Your mother will be charged with aggravated assault and battery. Your father will be charged as an accessory and with failure to render aid. We're also investigating potential charges related to the financial manipulation and theft you mentioned in your statement. Theft? The items that disappeared from your apartment. If we can prove she took them, that's theft. The fact that she manipulated the lease agreement to make you financially dependent on her while claiming you weren't paying your way, that could be financial exploitation. We're building a comprehensive case. She's going to hate me, I said, and my voice cracked. She's going to tell everyone I'm lying, that I'm vindictive, that I'm destroying the family. She's going to try, Detective Miller agreed. But Chloe, we have video evidence. We have medical records. We have witness testimony from Maya and Liam. We have documentation of her pattern of behavior. She can say whatever she wants, but the evidence speaks for itself. They arrested Eleanor and Richard on Tuesday. I wasn't there, didn't want to be there, but Detective Miller called to let me know it had happened. Eleanor had apparently screamed about false accusations and ungrateful children. Richard had said nothing at all, just handed over his lawyer's card and refused to speak without counsel present. They both made bail within hours. The restraining order was still in effect, but that just meant they couldn't contact me directly. It didn't stop Eleanor from posting on Facebook about how her daughter had betrayed her, how she had given me everything, and this was how I repaid her sacrifice. It didn't stop her friends from commenting sympathetically, from saying they couldn't imagine what Eleanor must be going through, from suggesting I must be mentally ill or on drugs or under the influence of bad friends. Maya screenshotted everything, documenting Eleanor's violation of the restraining order's spirit, if not its letter. She sent it all to Detective Miller, who added it to the file. I tried to go back to work on Wednesday, but my manager Patricia took one look at me and sent me home. The concussion symptoms were worse than I had admitted, and the stress wasn't helping. I spent most of that week sleeping, trying to heal, trying to process the reality that my entire life had imploded in the space of one evening. Maya suggested I see a therapist. She gave me the name of someone who specialized in family trauma, a woman named Dr. Chen who had a sliding scale fee structure and could see me quickly. I made an appointment for the following week, more because Maya insisted than because I believed it would help. My first session with Dr. Chen was awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't know how to talk about what had happened, didn't know where to start, didn't know how to explain a lifetime of dysfunction in 50 minutes. She didn't push, just asked gentle questions and let me talk when I was ready. By the third session, I was crying in her office, finally letting out years of suppressed emotion. She handed me tissues and told me that what I was feeling was normal, that trauma wasn't just in my head, that my body remembered even when my mind tried to forget. You've been in survival mode for most of your life, she explained. Your brain learned early that showing emotion wasn't safe, that taking up space wasn't safe, that having needs wasn't safe. Now you're in a different situation, but your nervous system doesn't know that yet. It's going to take time to retrain those responses. Time. Everyone kept talking about time like it was a resource I had in abundance. But every day felt like a battle. Every morning waking up felt like deciding to keep fighting, and I wasn't sure how long I could sustain that kind of exhaustion. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Vivienne Albright called me on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the assault. She introduced herself as the owner of a gallery in the Arts District, and she wanted to know if I was the photographer behind Fractured Light. I confirmed that I was, confused about how she had gotten my number. Your friend Maya reached out to me, Vivienne explained. She showed me your portfolio and told me a bit about your situation. I was moved by your work, Chloe, really moved. You have an eye for finding beauty in broken places, for capturing resilience in the midst of decay. I didn't know what to say. Maya had been sending my work to galleries without telling me, apparently determined to keep me moving forward even when I wanted to give up. I'd like to offer you a show, Vivienne continued. A full exhibition, not just a few pieces on a wall. Your work deserves to be seen properly, in a space that does it justice. Would you be interested in discussing details? I looked around Maya's guest room, at the boxes of my belongings that Liam had rescued, at the life I was trying to rebuild from fragments. A gallery show felt impossible, felt like something that happened to real artists, not to traumatized 23-year-olds sleeping on their friend's futon. Yes, I heard myself say. I'd be very interested. We met for coffee the next day. Vivian was in her 50s, elegant in a way that seemed effortless, with silver threaded through her dark hair and glasses that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked at my portfolio on my laptop, asking questions about technique and inspiration, and the stories behind certain images. I want to do a show called Fractured Light, she said. Same as your Instagram handle. We'll feature 30 to 40 pieces, a mix of your urban exploration work and some newer pieces that speak to your current experience. I think people need to see this. I think your story, told through your art, has the power to reach people who are struggling in similar ways. My story, I repeated. You mean the abuse? Vivienne met my eyes directly. I mean your survival, your resilience, the fact that you found a way to create beauty even when you were living in darkness. That's not a story about being a victim, Chloe. That's a story about being a survivor. I signed the contract that afternoon. The show would open in 6 weeks, giving me time to prepare pieces, to work with Vivienne on curation and sequencing, to write descriptions and artist statements. It felt surreal, felt like something happening to someone else, but Maya and Liam were thrilled, and their enthusiasm was infectious. I threw myself into preparation for the show. It gave me something to focus on other than the upcoming trial, something productive to do with my anxiety and anger. I printed photos, experimented with framing and sizing, wrote and rewrote descriptions, until the words felt honest without being self-pitying. Doctor Chen said the project was good therapy, that creating meaning from trauma was one way of processing it. She encouraged me to think about what I wanted people to understand about my work, about my experience, about the difference between being broken and being broken open. The preliminary hearing for Eleanor and Richard's criminal case happened 5 weeks after the assault. I had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom and describe what happened while Eleanor stared at me with undisguised hatred and Richard looked at the floor. Maya and Liam were there, sitting behind me, a physical reminder that I wasn't alone. The prosecutor, a woman named Jennifer Reeves who specialized in domestic violence cases, was thorough and compassionate. She walked me through the evening step by step, asked about the history of abuse, about the pattern of control and manipulation. When Eleanor's lawyer tried to suggest I had exaggerated my injuries, Jennifer produced the medical records, the photographs, the doctor's testimony about the severity of the concussion and lacerations. Then she played the video. I had seen it once before, in Detective Miller's office, preparing for this moment. But watching it in a courtroom, watching a room full of strangers see my mother deliberately hurt me while my father filmed, was different. The courtroom went silent. Even Eleanor's lawyer seemed taken aback by the casual cruelty on display. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Eleanor and Richard's bail was continued with the restraining order still in effect. As they left the courtroom, Eleanor tried to approach me, but bailiffs intervened. She settled for shouting across the space. "You're destroying this family," she screamed. "You're a liar and a manipulator, and you're going to regret this." "Mrs. Morgan, you're in violation of your restraining order," the judge said sharply. "Another outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt." Eleanor fell silent, but the look she gave me promised that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The gallery show opened on a Friday evening in late September. The space Vivienne had given me was beautiful, white walls and perfect lighting and enough room for my 42 selected pieces to breathe. I had chosen a mix of older work and new, images that told a story about finding light in darkness, about surviving despite everything. The centerpiece was a new self-portrait, taken the week before. Me, standing in front of a mirror in Vivienne's gallery, the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows, 6-week-old stitches still faintly visible on my temple. I wasn't smiling, but I wasn't hiding either. Just present, just alive, just myself. I titled it Witness, same as that earlier self-portrait, but this time, the meaning was different. I was witnessing my own survival, my own transformation, my own refusal to be defined by what had been done to me. The opening reception was crowded. Vivienne had promoted it well, and apparently the combination of my Instagram following and word of mouth about my story had created genuine interest. People I didn't know stood in front of my work, reading descriptions, discussing technique and emotion and meaning. A journalist from the local arts weekly asked to interview me. I said yes, even though talking about my work meant talking about my life, meant talking about the abuse. Dr. Chen had been working with me on owning my story, on refusing to feel shame about things that weren't my fault. The interview ran the following week with the headline, "Finding Beauty in Brokenness, Local Photographer Turns Trauma into Art." It was honest without being exploitative, focused on my work and my recovery, rather than sensationalizing the violence. Several other outlets picked it up, and suddenly my Instagram following exploded from 15,000 to over 60,000. Messages poured in from people sharing their own stories of family trauma, of escaping abusive relationships, of finding art and creativity in the midst of crisis. Some of them made me cry. All of them reminded me that I wasn't alone, that what had felt like an isolating nightmare was actually a common experience that too many people survived in silence. I sold 28 pieces in the first 2 weeks. At prices that Vivienne insisted were appropriate for my level of work, prices that seemed impossibly high but that people paid without hesitation. After the gallery took its commission, I had more money than I had ever had in my life. I used some of it to retain a civil attorney. David Young was recommended by Detective Miller, a lawyer who specialized in cases involving family abuse and financial exploitation. He listened to my story, reviewed the evidence, and told me we had an excellent case for a civil suit in addition to the criminal charges. "Your mother doesn't just get to assault you and walk away," he said. "Even if she serves jail time for the criminal charges, you deserve compensation for your medical expenses, for the therapy you'll need, for the emotional distress and trauma she caused. And your father, as an enabler and accomplice, is equally liable." We filed the civil suit in October. The criminal trial was scheduled for December, but David wanted to move quickly on the civil side, to establish damages and freeze assets before Eleanor and Richard could hide money or claim poverty. The discovery process was revealing. Eleanor's financial records showed she had been siphoning money from my education fund for years, as I had suspected. She had also taken out credit cards in my name when I was a minor, running up debt and never paying it off, destroying my credit before I even knew what credit was. Richard's cloud storage contained more than just videos of abuse. It contained detailed notes about my behavior, my movements, my friends, my work schedule. He had been documenting everything, building what he apparently believed was a case that I was an unfit, ungrateful child who deserved discipline. In reality, all he had done was document years of harassment and stalking and psychological abuse. David was methodical in building our case. He deposed Eleanor and Richard separately, asked detailed questions about their income and assets and expenses. He showed them evidence of their own wrongdoing, evidence they couldn't deny because they had created it themselves. Eleanor's deposition was particularly revealing. She continued to insist that she had done nothing wrong, that I was overreacting, that one moment of justified discipline didn't constitute abuse. But David kept showing her videos, kept showing her text messages, kept showing her evidence of a pattern that went back years. "Mrs. Morgan," he finally said, "you entered your daughter's apartment without permission on dozens of occasions. You took items that belonged to her. You manipulated lease agreements to maintain financial control over her. You destroyed her property and then assaulted her with the broken pieces. And you're sitting here telling me that you did nothing wrong?" "I'm her mother," Eleanor responded. "I have a right to be involved in her life." "No, Mrs. Morgan, you don't. Your daughter is an adult. She has the right to privacy, to autonomy, to live her life without fear of violence from the people who are supposed to love her. And your refusal to accept that, your continued insistence that you were justified, only proves how deeply dysfunctional your understanding of parenting really is." I wasn't present for the depositions, but David summarized them for me, and reading his notes was cathartic in a strange way. Seeing Eleanor's justifications and rationalizations written out, seeing them challenged by someone with legal authority, helped me understand that I hadn't been crazy, hadn't been oversensitive, hadn't been wrong to think her behavior was abnormal. The criminal trial began in early December, almost 5 months after the assault. I had to testify again, had to relive that night in excruciating detail for a jury. But Jennifer Reeves was skilled at making me feel safe even while discussing traumatic events. She asked clear questions, objected to badgering from the defense, and made sure the jury understood the full context of what had happened. Maya and Liam testified about what they witnessed. Detective Miller testified about the evidence collected, about the videos and text messages and pattern of behavior. The emergency room doctor testified about the severity of my injuries, about the location and force of the blow, about the unlikelihood that it was accidental, and then they played the videos. Not just from that Thursday night, but from months before. Hours of footage Richard had meticulously documented, footage that showed Eleanor's escalating abuse, my attempts to de-escalate and avoid conflict, the toxic dynamic that had defined my entire life. The defense tried to argue that Eleanor was a frustrated mother dealing with a difficult daughter. They tried to paint me as rebellious, ungrateful, mentally unstable. They brought up the fact that I had dropped out of college, conveniently ignoring that Eleanor had prevented me from enrolling in a 4-year school. They implied that my photography career was evidence of instability, of refusing to get a real job. Jennifer tore their arguments apart methodically. She showed my employment records, proving I had been consistently working. She showed my community college transcripts, proving I was still pursuing education. She brought in Dr. Chen, who testified as an expert witness about the effects of long-term psychological abuse on behavior and decision-making. And then she brought in Vivian Albright, who testified about my success as an artist, about the legitimacy of my career, about the way my work was resonating with audiences and generating income. Vivian brought photographs of my gallery show, articles that had been written about my work, proof that I wasn't some delusional child playing with a camera, but a genuine emerging talent in the photography world. Eleanor's face when Vivian was testifying was something I'll never forget. Utter disbelief that I had succeeded, that I had built something real, that my hobby had become a career despite her insistence that it was worthless. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the 4 women read the verdict with a steady voice. Guilty on all counts. Eleanor was convicted of aggravated assault and battery. Richard was convicted as an accessory and for failure to render aid. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later, giving time for victim impact statements and pre-sentencing reports. I wrote my victim impact statement over the course of a week, working through multiple drafts with Dr. Chen's help. I wanted to be honest without being vindictive, wanted to explain the full scope of the damage without sounding like I was asking for pity. On sentencing day, I stood in front of the judge and read my statement aloud. I talked about growing up feeling like I was never good enough, never worthy of basic respect or autonomy. I talked about the constant surveillance, the financial manipulation, the emotional abuse that made me question my own sanity. I talked about the assault, about the fear I felt in that moment and the fear I still sometimes feel when I hear a key in a lock or see someone who looks like Eleanor from behind. But I also talked about healing, about the therapy and the support from friends, and the way art had given me a language to process trauma, about the gallery show and the people who had reached out to share their own stories, about learning that I deserved better, that I wasn't defined by what had been done to me, that I had the right to a life free from violence and fear. My mother once told me I would never amount to anything, I concluded. She said my photography was worthless, that I was worthless, that I would always need her because I was incapable of surviving on my own. She was wrong. I am surviving. I am thriving. And I'm doing it despite her, not because of her. I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want acknowledgement that what happened to me was wrong. And I want to make sure she can never do this to anyone else. The judge sentenced Eleanor to 18 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. Richard got 6 months in jail and 2 years probation. Both were ordered to pay restitution for my medical expenses and to stay away from me permanently, not just during the duration of the restraining order but for the rest of their lives. It wasn't enough. No sentence could really be enough for 23 years of abuse, but it was something. It was accountability. It was a legal acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that they had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, that there were consequences for their actions. Eleanor screamed as she was led away, hurling accusations and threats. Richard went quietly, still silent, still unwilling to take any real responsibility. I walked out of that courtroom with Maya and Liam on either side of me. The winter sun was bright, cold, and clear. I took a breath, deep and full, and realized it was the first time in months that I didn't feel like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. The civil trial happened in February. By that point, Eleanor was in prison and Richard was out on bail pending his jail term, and neither of them put up much of a fight. David presented evidence of financial exploitation, of theft, of years of documented harassment. The jury awarded me compensatory damages for medical expenses and therapy costs, and punitive damages that totaled over $200,000. I would probably never see most of that money. Eleanor and Richard would file bankruptcy or hide assets or simply refuse to pay. But the judgment existed. The legal record existed. And that mattered more than the actual money. I used some of the money I had made from my gallery show to find my own apartment, a one-bedroom with high ceilings and large windows in a building across town from where Eleanor and Richard lived. I bought furniture that I chose myself, hung artwork that I loved, created a space that felt safe and mine, in a way nowhere had ever felt before. Vivienne offered me a second show, scheduled for the following fall. She wanted me to do a whole series on recovery and rebuilding, on what it looked like to construct a new life from the ruins of the old. I said yes, excited to have a project, excited to keep creating, excited to keep moving forward. Doctor Chen and I continued therapy, working through complex PTSD and learning to recognize trauma responses and developing coping skills. It was hard work, exhausting work, but necessary work. I was learning to identify my feelings, to trust my own perceptions, to believe that my needs mattered. Maya got engaged to Sam in March, and they asked me to be a bridesmaid. I cried when they asked, overwhelmed by the idea that I had people who loved me enough to want me in their important moments, who didn't see me as broken or damaged or too much. Liam started dating a teacher he met through one of his patients' parents, a woman who was kind and funny, and who embraced our little found family without hesitation. We started having regular dinners together, the 5 of us, cooking and laughing and building the kind of friendships that felt like chosen family. My Instagram following continued to grow. I hit 100,000 followers in April, mostly people who had connected with my work and my story. I started getting commissions for portraits, for editorial work, for projects that paid real money and gave me creative freedom. Photography went from a side hustle to a legitimate career, and I was supporting myself comfortably doing work I loved. A publisher reached out asking if I would be interested in doing a photography book, a collection of my work with essays about trauma and recovery and finding beauty in broken places. I said yes without hesitation, already imagining what that book might look like, what story it might tell. Eleanor was released from prison after serving 14 months. I got a notification from the Victim Services Office but didn't attend her release. I didn't need closure from her. I had found closure on my own. Richard served his full 6 months and was released quietly. I heard through distant relatives that he and Eleanor had divorced, that Eleanor had moved to a different state, that Richard was living alone in their old house, still filming everything, still convinced that he had done nothing wrong. I didn't care. Their lives, their choices, their consequences were no longer my concern. I focused on my own life, on my art and my therapy and my friendships, on building a career and creating work that mattered, on dating tentatively, learning what healthy relationships looked like, learning that I could be loved without conditions or control. Maya and Sam's wedding was in June, a beautiful outdoor ceremony where I stood up as a bridesmaid and cried happy tears for people I loved who were choosing each other freely and joyfully. My second gallery show opened in September, exactly 1 year after the first. This one was called Reconstructed and featured 47 pieces documenting my journey of recovery. Self-portraits showing the healing process, images of my new apartment, photographs of my friends, pictures of the city that had witnessed my transformation. The centerpiece was a triptych, 3 self-portraits taken a year apart. The first from a week after the assault, stitches visible, eyes haunted. The second from 6 months later, scar fading, expression more open. The third from just last week, standing in my own apartment with morning light streaming through windows I had chosen, plants I was keeping alive, artwork on walls I had painted myself. No fear, no hiding. Just me, present and whole and free. The show was a massive success. It sold out in the first 3 days. Critics praised the emotional honesty, the technical skill, the way I had transformed personal pain into universal art. But more importantly, it resonated with survivors. People who had escaped abusive families, who had rebuilt their lives from nothing, who understood what it meant to choose yourself even when it felt impossible. The book deal moved forward. I spent months curating images and writing essays, working with an editor who helped me find the balance between vulnerability and privacy, between telling my truth and protecting my healing. The book was scheduled for publication the following spring, with a title that had come to me one night while reviewing photos, Fractured Light, Finding Myself in the Broken Places. I gave a TEDx talk in November about art as trauma recovery, about how creativity can be both witness and healing. The video went viral, getting over 1 million views in the first month. I started getting speaking requests from universities, from conferences, from organizations that worked with abuse survivors. It was surreal, this new life I was building. Some days I still woke up, expecting to hear Eleanor's key in a lock that no longer existed. Some days I still checked over my shoulder, still felt that old anxiety crawling up my spine. But those days were getting rarer, the spaces between them growing longer. Doctor Chen said that was normal, that healing wasn't linear, that trauma would always be part of my story even if it no longer defined me. I learned to be patient with myself, to recognize triggers without being controlled by them, to know the difference between being careful and being afraid. Maya and Sam bought a house in March of the following year. They had a housewarming party where I met cousins and colleagues and friends from their various communities. People who knew me only as Chloe the photographer, not as Chloe the abuse survivor, not as Chloe the girl whose mother went to prison. Just Chloe. It felt revolutionary, being seen as a whole person rather than a collection of traumas and reactions. Liam proposed to his girlfriend Emily on her birthday. They planned a small wedding for the fall, and I was honored to be included in their celebration. These people who had witnessed my lowest moment were now witnessing my highest ones, and the symmetry felt significant somehow. I started teaching photography workshops at a community center, working with teenagers who were aging out of foster care or dealing with family dysfunction. I taught them about composition and lighting and storytelling, but mostly I taught them that they had the right to document their own lives, to create their own narratives, to find beauty even in difficult circumstances. One girl, 17 with eyes that had seen too much, told me after class that my work had inspired her to start taking photos of her own neighborhood, of the people and places that mattered to her. She showed me her phone, images of broken playground equipment and murals painted on abandoned buildings and kids playing basketball on cracked courts. They were good. Really good. You have real talent, I told her, and I meant it. She looked at me skeptically. You think I could actually do something with this? I think you're already doing something with it, I said. You're telling stories that matter. You're bearing witness. That's what art is. She smiled, small and uncertain but real, and I saw myself in her. The version of me who had taken photos in secret, who had been told my work was worthless, who had needed someone to say that what I was doing mattered. I gave her one of my older cameras, a Canon Rebel that I had upgraded from but that still worked perfectly. She tried to refuse, said she couldn't accept something that expensive, but I insisted. Someone gave me a chance once, I told her. Now I'm giving you one. Use it. Create something. Tell your story. The book came out in April to strong reviews and surprisingly robust sales. It debuted on the New York Times photography bestseller list, which I hadn't even known was a thing until my publisher called to congratulate me. There were book signings and readings and interviews, a whole publicity tour that felt overwhelming and exciting in equal measure. At one reading, in a bookstore in Portland, a woman approached me afterward. She was maybe 60, with gray hair and careful makeup and hands that shook slightly as she held my book. I want to thank you, she said. I've been out of contact with my daughter for 5 years because she cut me off after I behaved badly. Controlling, manipulative. Reading your book helped me understand what I did to her, how I hurt her. I'm in therapy now. I'm working on myself. And I wrote her a letter apologizing, not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, just acknowledging that she was right and I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't written the book to educate abusive parents. I had written it for survivors. But if it helped someone understand the impact of their actions, helped someone take accountability, that was valuable too. I hope your work helps you heal, I finally said, and I hope your daughter finds peace, whatever that looks like for her. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away clutching the book. That encounter stayed with me for weeks. Dr. Chen and I talked about it in therapy, about the complexity of forgiveness and accountability, about the difference between understanding someone's behavior and excusing it. You don't owe Eleanor understanding or forgiveness, Doctor, Chen reminded me. Her journey, if she ever chooses to take one, is separate from yours. Your healing doesn't require her participation or her acknowledgement or her change. I knew that intellectually. Emotionally, it was harder. Some part of me still wanted my mother to apologize, to admit she had been wrong, to acknowledge the damage she had done. But waiting for that would be giving her power over my healing, and I had worked too hard to reclaim my power to give it away again. I heard through distant relatives that Eleanor had watched my TEDx talk, that she had read my book. I didn't know how to feel about that. Violated, maybe, that she was consuming my story after being written out of my life, but also defiant. She couldn't stop me from telling the truth. She couldn't silence me anymore. The relative said she claimed I had exaggerated everything, that she had been a devoted mother who made mistakes but didn't deserve to be vilified publicly. The same old story, the same old justifications. I blocked those relatives. I didn't need updates about Eleanor's life or opinions. I had built boundaries, and I was going to maintain them. My third gallery show opened in September, 2 years after the first. This one was called Witnessing Joy and featured images of happiness and connection and ordinary moments of beauty. My friends laughing, strangers dancing in the park, sunrise over the river, a child blowing bubbles, life not as something to survive but as something to celebrate. It was my most successful show yet, both critically and commercially. Vivienne said I had evolved as an artist, that my work was maturing, becoming more nuanced and hopeful without losing its emotional depth. "You're not just documenting pain anymore," she said. "You're documenting resilience, recovery, the full spectrum of being human." I took that as the compliment it was meant to be. That winter, I bought my first house. Nothing huge, just a small bungalow with a yard and a garage I converted into a darkroom for analog photography. It needed work, needed painting and repairs and modernization, but it was mine in a way nothing had ever been mine before. No co-signers, no shared leases. Just my name on the deed, my money in the mortgage, my choices in every room. Maya and Sam helped me move in. Liam and Emily brought pizza and champagne. We sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating and drinking and making plans for how I would decorate, what furniture I needed, what color to paint the walls. To Chloe, Maya said, raising her plastic champagne flute, who survived hell and came out the other side stronger and more badass than ever. To chosen family, I said, raising my own glass, to the people who showed up when it mattered and never stopped showing up. We clinked plastic cups and drank cheap champagne and laughed until my sides hurt, and I thought about how far I had come. From a girl too afraid to invite friends to her apartment to a woman hosting them in her own house. From someone who defined herself by the abuse she had endured to someone who defined herself by the life she had created. The nightmares still came sometimes. I would wake up in a cold sweat, disoriented, convinced Eleanor was in my house. But then I would remember the locks I had installed, the security system, the restraining order, the legal protections I had put in place. And more importantly, I would remember that even if she showed up, I wasn't that scared girl anymore. I was stronger now. I had resources, had support, had evidence and law enforcement and a whole network of people who would believe me and help me. I started dating more seriously. Nothing rushed, nothing desperate, just letting people in gradually and paying attention to red flags instead of ignoring them. I dated a software engineer for a few months before realizing we wanted different things. I dated a teacher who was kind but ultimately boring. I went on dozens of first dates that didn't turn into second dates. And then I met James at a photography exhibition, not mine but another artist's. He was a graphic designer, funny and thoughtful, with an easy smile and no apparent baggage about strong women with complicated histories. We talked for 3 hours that first night, about art and creativity and what it meant to make work that mattered. He asked me out. I said yes. We took it slow, both of us cautious for different reasons, but it felt healthy and balanced in a way my previous relationships hadn't. He respected my boundaries, never pushed for more information than I was ready to give, treated me like an equal partner rather than a project to fix. When I finally told him about Eleanor and the assault and the trial, 6 months into our relationship, he listened without judgment or pity. Just listened, held my hand, and said he was sorry I had gone through that but impressed by how I had handled it. "You're the strongest person I know," he said, "and I feel lucky to know you." It was the kind of thing that might have sounded like a line from anyone else. But from James, it just sounded true. 3 years after the assault, I got a letter from Eleanor. It came through her lawyer, carefully worded to not violate the restraining order, but clearly meant for me. She said she had been in therapy, had been working on herself, wanted me to know that she understood now that she had made mistakes. Mistakes. As if assault and abuse and years of psychological torture were mistakes, as if they were accidents rather than deliberate choices. She said she hoped one day I could forgive her, could give her a chance to rebuild our relationship, could see that she had always loved me even if she showed it poorly. I read the letter once, then put it through my shredder. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. She didn't get to decide the terms of my healing, didn't get to demand forgiveness as if it was something she was owed. Dr. Chen and I talked about it in therapy. She reminded me that forgiveness was optional, that I could release anger without forgiving the person who hurt me, that my well-being didn't require Eleanor's participation. She wants absolution, Dr. Chen said. She wants you to tell her she's not a bad person. But you don't owe her that. Her guilt is hers to manage, not yours to relieve. I liked that framing. Her guilt was hers. Her choices were hers. Her consequences were hers. I had carried her emotional weight for 23 years. I wasn't going to pick it up again just because she was finally ready to acknowledge it existed. My 4th gallery show opened in the fall, 3 years after the first. This one was different. Instead of focusing on my own story, I had collaborated with other survivors of family abuse, creating portraits and collecting testimonies. 30 people, 30 stories, 30 images of resilience and recovery. The opening reception was packed. Many of the participants came, brought friends and families who had supported them, created a community of survivors that felt powerful and healing. We weren't victims anymore. We were witnesses. We were artists. We were people who had survived and were building lives worth living. A reporter from a major newspaper did a feature on the show, interviewing several participants and writing a long piece about the epidemic of family abuse and the importance of art in processing trauma. It went viral, got shared millions of times, started conversations about toxic family dynamics and the courage it takes to walk away. I gave interviews, did podcast appearances, spoke at conferences, not because I wanted to be famous or because I enjoyed reliving my trauma publicly, but because I wanted other survivors to know they weren't alone, that leaving was possible, that healing was possible, that they deserved better than what they had been given. The speaking engagements led to consulting work with nonprofits that supported abuse survivors. I helped them think about creative programming, about how art and photography and storytelling could be tools for healing and empowerment. I taught workshops, mentored young artists, created spaces for people to tell their stories on their own terms. It became a career, this intersection of art and advocacy. I still did commercial photography, still took commissions and worked on personal projects, but increasingly, my focus shifted toward work that made a difference, that helped people, that contributed to something larger than myself. James and I moved in together after dating for 2 years. We bought a house together, bigger than my bungalow, with space for both of our work and our lives. He converted the basement into a studio for me, complete with darkroom and editing station and storage for equipment. I helped him set up his home office, made sure he had good light and comfortable furniture and space to be creative. It was a partnership in the truest sense. We supported each other's work, respected each other's needs, navigated conflicts with communication instead of manipulation. It was the healthiest relationship I had ever had, and sometimes I marveled at how normal it felt, how easy it was to be with someone who treated me with basic respect and kindness. Maya and Sam had a baby, a little girl they named Claire. I was honored to be her godmother, to be entrusted with this tiny human's well-being and spiritual guidance. Holding her for the first time, feeling her weight in my arms and seeing her trust that I would keep her safe, broke something open in me. This was what family was supposed to be. Not obligation or ownership or control, but love freely given, trust earned, support without strings. I took hundreds of photos of Claire in her first year. Sleeping, eating, playing, crying, experiencing the world with fresh eyes and no preconceptions. Maya said I captured something essential about her, something more than just a baby but a whole person becoming herself. You see people, Maya said, looking at the portraits I had given her. You see who they really are, beneath the surface. That's your gift. I thought about that often. About how the same skill that had helped me survive, the hypervigilance that had taught me to read Eleanor's moods and anticipate her rages, had transformed into something useful and good. I could read people, could see beneath their presentations to their truth, and I could capture that truth in images that made them feel seen. 5 years after the assault, I got word that Richard had died. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers or a card. I simply noted the information and moved on with my day. I felt nothing about his death. No satisfaction, no grief, no relief. Just a distant acknowledgement that someone who had hurt me no longer existed. Dr. Chen said that was normal, that I didn't owe him posthumous forgiveness or feelings I didn't have. Eleanor apparently attended the funeral, was seen crying over his casket, telling anyone who would listen about what a good man he had been. The irony of her mourning someone she had divorced wasn't lost on me. I didn't hear from her directly. The restraining order was still in effect, and she was smart enough not to violate it now. But I imagined she thought about me, wondered if I would come to the funeral, wondered if this might be an opportunity for reconciliation. It wasn't. Richard's death didn't change anything between us. He had made his choices. She had made hers. I had made mine. And I was living with the consequences of my choices, which included a life free from their toxicity. My book had been out for 3 years and was still selling steadily. The publisher approached me about doing a follow-up, a companion volume about recovery and rebuilding. I said yes, excited to document the next chapter, the part of the story that came after survival. James proposed on a random Tuesday evening in our living room. No big production, no public spectacle, just the two of us in a ring and a question he already knew the answer to. I said yes through tears, overwhelmed by the reality that I was choosing to build a life with someone who chose me back, freely and fully. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and chosen family. Maya and Sam and little Claire, Liam and Emily and their toddler son, Vivienne and her wife, Dr. Chen, who had become more friend than therapist over the years. The teenagers from my photography workshops, all grown up now, some of them thriving artists in their own right, no biological family. No cousins or aunts or grandparents who had stood by while Eleanor destroyed me. Just people who had earned their place in my life, who had shown up consistently, who had loved me without trying to control me. The wedding was in June, in a garden overlooking the river. I wore a dress I chose myself, carried flowers I loved, said vows I wrote that promised partnership and respect, and the freedom to be myself. James promised the same, and when we kissed as married partners, I felt the click of rightness, of this being exactly where I was supposed to be. At the reception, Maya gave a toast that made everyone cry. She talked about meeting me in 7th grade, about watching me survive impossible circumstances, about the moment in the emergency room when she realized I might not survive, about the journey of recovery and growth and becoming. Chloe is the strongest person I know, she said, not because she endured abuse, but because she escaped it. Because she chose herself when it would have been easier to stay small and silent. Because she turned pain into art and art into healing, not just for herself, but for thousands of people who needed to hear her story. I'm honored to know her. I'm honored to call her family, and I'm so grateful that she found James, who sees her for exactly who she is and loves her accordingly. I ugly cried through the whole speech, mascara running, nose red, not caring who saw. These were happy tears, grateful tears. Tears that said I had made it, had survived, had built a life worth celebrating. We honeymooned in Iceland, spent 2 weeks photographing landscapes and northern lights and the strange, otherworldly beauty of volcanic fields and glaciers. James had never seen me so fully in my element, so engaged with my work, so present and alive. He took photos of me taking photos, capturing my joy in the creative process. When we got home, I started working on the new book. I called it Reconstructed, Building a Life After Trauma, and it documented the 5 years since the assault. Photos of my home, my friends, my work, my wedding. Essays about therapy and boundaries and learning to trust again. Testimonies from other survivors about their own paths to healing. It was harder to write than the first book. The first book had been about surviving. This one was about thriving, and there was less cultural script for that. People understood trauma narratives. They were less clear on recovery narratives, on what happened after you escaped. But I persisted, worked through multiple drafts, collaborated with my editor to find the balance between hopeful and honest. Recovery wasn't linear. Healing wasn't a destination you reached and then maintained effortlessly. It was ongoing work, daily choices, constant recommitment to yourself and your well-being. The book came out the following spring, 6 years after the assault. It sold even better than the first one, resonated with readers who were further along in their own healing journeys and needed permission to celebrate their progress rather than dwelling on their pain. I went on another book tour, this time with James accompanying me, providing support and companionship. At one reading in Chicago, a woman approached me with a familiar story. Abusive mother. Enabling father. Years of control and manipulation. She had escaped 3 years earlier and was still struggling with guilt and doubt. Does it get easier? She asked. Does the guilt ever go away? I thought about that question carefully before answering. It gets different, I finally said. The guilt doesn't disappear, but it becomes less consuming. You learn to recognize it as programming, as something you were taught to feel rather than something you deserve to feel. And slowly, over time, you build a life that's so good, so worth protecting, that the guilt can't compete with the gratitude. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and thanked me for being honest. That became my mantra for the tour. for the workshops and speaking engagements that followed. Be honest. Don't sugarcoat recovery. Don't pretend healing is easy or linear or complete, but also don't dwell in the darkness. Show people that life after abuse is possible, that joy after trauma is real, that you can build something beautiful from broken pieces. 7 years after the assault, Maya and Sam asked me to take family photos, professional ones, for their holiday cards. I spent an afternoon at their house, photographing them with Claire and their new baby son, capturing their love and connection and the family they had built. Editing those photos later, I realized this was what I had always wanted. Not the perfect nuclear family of sitcoms and greeting cards, but this messy, beautiful chosen family that showed up for each other and loved without conditions. I had that now. With James, with Maya and Sam and their kids, with Liam and Emily and their children, with Vivienne and Dr. Chen and the community I had built around myself. I had family, real family, the kind that earned the title through action rather than claiming it through biology. Eleanor sent another letter on the 8th anniversary of the assault. Another carefully worded message through her lawyer, another attempt at reconciliation that felt more about her needs than mine. She said she was dying, had been diagnosed with cancer, wanted to make peace before it was too late. I read the letter and felt nothing, not satisfaction that she was facing mortality, not guilt that she was sick, not obligation to provide deathbed reconciliation, just a distant awareness that this person who had once controlled my entire existence now had no power over me at all. I didn't respond. I didn't visit. I didn't send well wishes or offer forgiveness. I simply filed the letter away and continued living my life. Dr. Chen said that was okay, that I didn't owe Eleanor anything, that my absence might actually be the most honest response I could give. She's asking for something you don't have to give, Dr. Chen said, and that's your right. Eleanor died 6 months later. I heard about it through the same distant relatives I had blocked years earlier, who found ways to get messages to me despite my boundaries. They said she had asked for me at the end, had wanted to see me, had wanted to apologize. I didn't feel guilty. I felt sad, maybe, that she had lived her whole life without understanding what she had done, without truly taking accountability, without changing in any meaningful way. But mostly I felt relief that it was finally over, that she could no longer try to manipulate me into forgiving her, that I could close that chapter completely. I didn't attend the funeral. I didn't need closure from her body in a casket. I had found closure years earlier, in therapy and in art and in the life I had built. She was a part of my story, but she was no longer part of my life, and her death didn't change that. James asked if I wanted to do anything to mark the occasion. I thought about it and realized I did. I wanted to create something, wanted to transform this final ending into art. I spent 3 months working on a new series, self-portraits taken in locations that mattered. The hospital where I had gotten stitches, the courthouse where Eleanor had been convicted, the gallery where I had first shown my work, my home, my studio, my life as it was now. In each location, I set up the camera and positioned myself in the frame, then stepped out and added something that represented growth. Flowers growing through cracks in concrete, light streaming through windows I had opened, artwork I had created hanging on walls I controlled. The final image was taken in my backyard, James and me together, holding hands, looking at the camera with expressions that were open and happy and free. No performance, no masks, just us, choosing each other, choosing joy, choosing life. I called the series The Last Time and exhibited it at Vivienne's gallery 9 years after my first show. The reception was packed, the show garnered national attention, and it became my most successful work to date. But the success didn't matter as much as the process had. Creating those images, documenting my journey from that hospital bed to this life, gave me a sense of completion I hadn't realized I needed. I had survived, I had healed, I had built something beautiful. And Eleanor's death couldn't take any of that away. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself whole? Have you ever had to walk away from someone who was supposed to love you because staying was killing you? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story meant something to you, if it helped you feel less alone in your own struggle, hit that like button and subscribe, because we all deserve to tell our own stories. We all deserve to be free.